So, Jerry, what does being a great session player mean to you?
Being a great session musician, you have a good user interface when you come in. You're easy to work with. You got a good work ethic. And then you got big ears where you're listening to a song deeply to try to pick out what's there to keep, what's there to maybe change a little bit as far as arrangement especially. And then also when you're in a tracking situation, really listening, big ears to listen to what the other guys are playing.
Where in your life did you start to learn how to have those ears and listen to music from that perspective?
There was kind of a natural transition. I grew up in Texas where you would be playing with someone live, so you'd have to learn their music. And then they would bring in some original stuff, and you would come up with your own parts. And then they'd say, hey, we're going into the studio. Do you want to come in and cut some of these songs? And you're like, yeah. And so it's a natural progression. It was a natural progression for me to be able to go from, live guy to get into some session work.
Gotcha. So some of your first session experiences came from people that you were playing with live.
Yeah. And it's one of those situations where I didn't know this at the time, but I've heard people say, get in a situation where everybody around you is better than you, because it'll help you see where your flaws are. It'll help drag you up because you want to be good. You want to be better. And if you're the kingpin of the band, you can rest on those laurels and maybe not stretch yourself.
Do you remember any times in your career early on where you might have had to make a decision to step away from something that wasn't pushing you enough? Or how you ended up in a position where you were with people that were sort of at that next level to help you grow?
It's like right when you get a new skill set or you improve your skills as a player, a musician, it catches the eye of somebody else, it catches the ear of somebody else, and they'll pull you into their thing. It's like, hey, we could use that guy, So each time you hone your skills a little bit better, it puts you into a little bit better of a slot, kind of moves you up the ladder.
Right. And as you were figuring those things out, were there any specific exercises or practices that you did to start to learn how to listen to music from that perspective, or learn how to explore your instrument in a better way? Well,
there was a particular instance a long time ago back in Houston, Texas. A friend of mine, I was playing with him live. He brought in some of his guys that he used to be on the road with to go into the studio, and these guys were real deal cats. They knew where the pocket was. They knew how to lean it forward, how to lean it back. They could do anything with the beat. It was amazing. The drummer was Bill Maxwell, who was a great L.A. Session player and producer, a drummer out in L.A. And then Harlan Rogers, great keyboardist, amazing on B3 and Fender Rhodes, and had a pocket for days. And I was in the studio with those guys and was being fed a click, and we were all listening to the same click, but you would never know it from my playing. Yeah, it's kind of like my pocket was kind of like teen sex. It was kind of like a little frantic, and kind of like, oh, this is going to be great, that kind of a thing. And I distinctly remember at the end of the sessions walking out with Harlan Rogers, who's just like this masterful groove dude, and I'm asking him, I'm saying, so where I'm hearing the click and where it actually is are two different things? And he's like, yeah, bro, you're hearing it up here and it's further back. It's actually further back. So it got me exploring where to find that deeper pocket and to work on it, because that's one of the prerequisites to getting your parts stuck to tape or stuck to Pro Tools and to make the mix. With Pro Tools, they can slide you around, but back at that point, it's like what you played was where it was going to be, and it had to be in the pocket. It had to be where everybody else was.
Right.
So that really got me on that quest to practice with a metronome or with a drum machine, and I'll still do that. But it's great now, like with Pro Tools or whatever you're recording into, you can see where you are. You can see if you're wanting to put it forward, where it is. If you're wanting to lean it back, where it is, you can actually see what you're doing now. So there's a tremendous advantage of having that visual.
So when you were learning to find that pocket, was there specific practice? Like you would put on a metronome at a certain tempo, and then what sort of stuff would you play?
Well, just a lot of chordal stuff, a lot of rhythmic stuff, because typically when you're in a live situation, since you're a sideman, you're going to be playing a lot of rhythm stuff. But then it's interesting. It's like a different muscle set when you go to single line stuff. You could have a really great pocket chordally, and then you get to single line stuff, and it's just like, there's a whole nother set of muscles for single line stuff. So it would be a matter of both, of both doing chordal stuff and lead stuff where you're still in the pocket, because stuff typically wants to lean forward. You go to a concert and people start clapping along with the beat and they end up taking off.
Right.
It's just human nature.
So being aware of that.
Yes.
And when you would do this practice, would you record yourself and then listen back to it to be able to?
I would do that. I come from a bit of a scientific, analytical nature. So I do stuff like that. I do tests on myself, So I have definitely done that. Yeah, I've gone down that path.
So that's something that up and coming players could definitely make one of their priorities, and an exercise that they could work on.
Yeah.
So what led you to Nashville?
I went to school at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, and there was a Christian label down there, Word Records, and a lot of people from Baylor went to intern at Word. Ended up working for Word, ended up moving to Nashville when Word moved to Nashville. So all these contacts that I had in Texas ended up moving to Nashville. It's a good town, great music center, and there's amazing players here. Amazing players. So I'm so fortunate to have been able to make it up here.
So when you moved here, did you move here like for an opportunity, or did you move here because you thought this was the location?
I was very fortunate in that while I was living in Texas, I ended up getting a road gig with a Christian singer, Amy Grant. And she was moving into pop at that time. And so I was able to move into town with a gig, which is a pretty good deal. And it was a really good gig. Right. It was. I've never done a club tour, or, it's always been at the minimum theaters and then concert halls and arenas and stuff. So I've been very fortunate in that regard.
So when you had that gig, which is a really great artist to to be able to move to town to play with, what are the things that you feel like you learned right away on the road playing it with a higher level artist like that? How were you able to be successful in that?
You instantly saw where you needed to be. I instantly saw that I needed to be up to the level of the parts and the playing that were on her records. On her records was mainly Dan Huff. And so I was like, all right, for the road, I need to be Dan Huff. And I greatly admired Dan at that point. Even I knew about him from, back in Texas. So I had to learn those parts, get those sounds, and then execute them, And it was funny because Dan, or any of us session players, when we go play on someone's record, you play it 2 or 3 times, or something like that, 3 or 4 times, depending on who you're working for. Dan would play these parts like a few times and he'd forget about it, and then I would play it 300 times on the road. So those parts really became ingrained into my playing. And he was in LA at that time, and they sounded pretty slick in LA at that time, and he's in Nashville, back to Nashville now. And he's gritted stuff up, gritted with T's. I wanted to be able to play Dan Huff parts with a little bit more of a grit and a little bit more of an alternative bent, which is where my head, is. And so I learned this whole vocabulary of what to play on this particular kind of a song. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. It's like being able to speak a language, where somebody could point to you and go, all right, you're at a social meeting and they ask you to get up and speak and to talk about whatever, what can you do? And I thought, well, I can cover this topic, this topic, this topic. No, do that second topic. And you get up and nail it,
Right.
So just having to learn those parts and those sounds it was huge as far as arming me to be able to be a session player here in town.
So I imagine for someone that may not be as fortunate to have that sort of gig, that with the technology that we have these days, I mean, a player that's coming up and trying to work on those things could grab maybe the top 10, top 20 songs in the genre that they're kind of, that they naturally lean towards, and maybe learn those songs that way, recreate the sounds, recreate the parts, and practice them in a similar way, to be able to build those skill sets. But what I'm hearing is that when you learned these parts, you started to recognize that it wasn't just learning the part to be able to step on stage and play it. You saw, as you looked back, you saw that you were building a toolbox that you could pull from when you got put into a session.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the difference between when you're learning parts for a live gig on any level versus learning parts just to learn them, is that there's a deadline. If you're doing something live with someone, there's a deadline. There's going to be your friends, the other people in the band, hearing you play it, the artist hearing you play it, the audience hearing you play it, and you have to deliver, in other words. If you're at your leisure learning parts off a record, it doesn't have the same emergency,
accountability to it.
Accountability to it. So it's, as much as I don't enjoy learning parts, it's one of those things. Do I have to? Yeah, you have to. Okay, I will. And I'm so glad that I did.
So when did some of these opportunities come for you to start playing on records in Nashville?
Well, I started coming to Nashville in the 80s, and in the late 80s, I decided that it was time for me to move from Texas to Nashville. It just didn't make sense to be hanging in Texas anymore. I ended up living at Amy's farm out in Franklin for a while, for a few months. They had a studio down in their basement, and fully loaded up studio. So I would go down, have breakfast, and I would go down to the basement and come up with tracks. And I'd play something for Amy, and she'd go, yeah, let me work on some lyrics for that. So she had an album called Lead Me On, which we cut in the late 80s. It was my first time to get to record with her. And so I ended up getting 3 co-writes, because I would hand her a track, she would write to it. She would write lyrics to it. And
wow, you're like the original Nashville track guy.
Yeah, exactly. She was top lining back in the late 80s. So it was really great in that, for a while, I was kind of disappointed that I wasn't getting to play on her records, but at the same time, I'm so glad that it wasn't until that particular record I wasn't ready, And sometimes you can want something so bad that you're wanting that end thing, and you shoot for it and you get it and you realize you weren't ready, and you blow the opportunity and you look bad in front of everybody, so they don't call you the next time.
Right.
So I'm really glad that things worked out the way it did, that I was able to hold off and really be ready when it was time to go in and cut.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's such a challenging thing to be patient when you have something that you love doing so much.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to do that thing at a high level. We want to have those opportunities where we can make an impact with the talent that we have. But it can be really challenging to stay patient, to wait until you're ready for those, those moments. There's also some moments where we need to kind of jump in to be able to prove ourselves, and step up to the plate. Yeah. And that can be a really challenging balance to be able to know when you're ready, but also know to when maybe you're almost ready and you need that little bit of motivation or push, to be able to throw into something, to be able to prove to yourself that you can, do it. Where did you start to retain the confidence to know that when you step in the room, you're there for a reason and you're going to be able to execute?
Think about the ego, the human ego. When you're young and I remember being, playing basketball and, shooting hoops in my backyard. I'm terrible, but, we had a goal, and I would be in my brain imagining that, there's a crowd and I finally make it and I win the championship. There's this whole thing that you think that you're better than you are, and you can come to town thinking that you're better than you are as far as a player. And there's that fine balance between you getting plugged in finally and realizing, oh, I'm not that good, I'm going to go home. Or, you get plugged in enough situations, and you have enough of an ego where you think, I'm good enough to work with this person, and you work up to it. Your ego kind of can either push you along in a healthy way, or it can put you in a spot that you're served before your time.
I think there's so much about the careers in this industry that have to do with like self-awareness,
Right?
and
Yes.
awareness of others, around you. You know, you mentioned having those big ears to listen to the songs, and to what other players are doing, but also to the conversations that are happening in the room, to understand the way that the interactions are happening. Start to be a little mini psychologist, within the environments that we're in. And it's also really important for us to be able to look internally into ourselves to start to develop those instincts of knowing when something is a right move or when something is something that we may need to, to wait for.
Right.
And then to be able to just have the ego or the confidence to know that we're here for a reason. We have this thing that we're passionate about. We just need to stick with it, keep going after it until we can find the path that makes sense for us.
And as far as confidence, because you were asking, when did you feel like you had the confidence? I mean, years and years of doing sessions where you're getting double scale, and the record people are there in the control room. They've got a lot of money on the line. The artist is there. They're shooting video or whatever, and all the players are in the hot seat. Mm-hmm. It's funny whether it was one of those or a demo session or whatever. For years and years, I would still walk in quietly in the back of my brain. I would be going, well, maybe this is the day where I show them that I'm actually not that good. and it took a long time to get past that. And this was well into my session career where I'd still think that on the way in. And I've talked to other players that would think the same thing. And you know what we'll do is that we'll go in and we'll do great, not to our standards, but we'll do great. And the producer's going, man, what you played was fantastic, whether they say it to me or the drummer or whatever. And then we get in our cars, we drive home, and we go, so-and-so could have played it better. Or so-and-so would have had it faster. Driving home, just kind of beating yourself up.
Yeah, it just stays in your mind.
Yeah, it stays in your mind. But even though you did great,
right,
and they're pitching babies over what you did, you still judge yourself. You still think, how could I have done it better?
And that can also be constructive to push you forward, to grow.
Yep.
But the important thing is finding the balance. And I think that sort of brings up this topic of what sort of skill sets are important to be a successful session player.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a perception, especially when you're a student, that you're getting a degree in your instrument. Mm-hmm. You're learning a lot of very technical things and a lot of very complicated things.
Right.
And then you get in a studio environment, and a lot of those things don't translate. They don't work. So I think a lot of players have this perception of learn all the licks, be able to play all the notes, and do this real complicated stuff to be sort of like a virtuoso on your instrument.
Yeah.
But then it's almost like you have to dumb it down once you get in the studio to be able to find your space within a record. So what are some of the principles that you learned in that regard?
I find that you have to be brilliantly dumb. It's like there's a depth to playing simple, because number one, what we do here is we're not doing instrumental records. We're supporting a singer and a song, and they have to win. It's a lot simpler and harder than what it appears. Mm-hmm. To play simply and to play something melodic that sticks in someone's brain, that when that comes on the radio, they instantly know what it is. It's kind of harder than it looks. Now we move so quickly that you have to be able, at great speed, be able to play in tune, in time. In the pocket with the drummer. And knowing that they may move him to the click, they may grid him dead on, which we do a lot of times. We've done on masters where it's 2 songs in a session, 3 songs in a session, and then if it's a developmental deal, it can be 4 or 5 songs in a 3-hour period.
Right.
For publishing demos, it can be 6 songs, which goes by so quickly. And as a guitar player, they're wanting overdubs from you too. So you're thinking about your first part, how it's going to satisfy everyone, that they hear what they think that the guitar should be playing, but it has to fit with your next part to fill in. Your next part's going to fill in some of those other gaps. So being able to hear parts and to know which ones to play for that first pass that you feel like will satisfy the artist. Yeah, it sounds aggressive enough. You have to start with the right parts, the right sounds. You have to keep that, personality-wise, keep things moving, keep things light, where the creativity keeps flowing and no one feels like they're being squashed or whatever. And to do it all while you look like it's just a natural second nature thing.
But if we break down those skills into a few topics that I think come up quite a bit, one of those is coming up with a hook, or a motif, or a part within there. Now, it's amazing to me how players can seemingly so effortlessly come up with a part that just fits into this track great, and sounds unique. There with not only the melody itself, but also the tone. So if you know that this is a song that is going to require a sig part, is what we call it in Nashville, or a hook that's going to happen in the intro, the turnaround, the outro sort of thing. This part that's the repetitive instrumental hook within the song. What do you listen for in the track or in the vocal that helps to inform maybe a starting point for you?
As a guitar player, what I'm trying to do is catch a vision, almost like if I were to, I'm listening to the work tape, but I'm casting it as if it were on stage live. So I'm thinking of a particular artist, and I'm thinking of the instrumentation and what type of song it is, and that will help me as far as the tone of it and everything, the general feel of the chord progression, the rhythm of it and everything helps dictate whether it's kind of a notey hook or more of a long line hook. And to come up with that hook without playing it first, I have to hear it in my head. You have unlimited imagination in your brain. And with the guitar, with any instrument, there's going to be some limitations or whatever, or you don't want it to be too guitaristic. You want it to be more melodic. So I always try to come up with those ideas without the guitar in my hands. I'll sing it. I'll go on sessions with my phone, have it on voice memo, and if I come up with a melody in my brain, I'll hit the voice memo and I will poorly sing it into voice memo, and then I'll go out and learn it. And for me, that's the best way, is to use that unlimited imagination and vision in your brain, and then tell your dumb guitar fingers how to play it.
Another one of those things that seems effortless, but there's a lot to it, is the ability to simplify a part but still make a strong statement. So there could be an example where you put a very experienced session player and you put just a really good guitar player, someone that's practiced their instrument and they know it well and they can play all the chords. Let's say that we have a verse that just has a pretty straightforward progression. The vocal is, it's a song that is a commercial, song, regardless of genre, something that is lyric and, and vocal focused. And you need to follow those chords and the rhythm, but in a way that doesn't just sound like you're blocking out. Right. What are some of the things that inform that sort of decision?
Part of our job is, as players, producers, engineers, everybody, and the songwriter, is to pull the listener through the song. If you set up this thing where everything is just linear, static for 3.5 minutes, you've numbed them, and they're not going to stick around for the whole song. So getting that dynamic range of, and we decide, is everybody in at the top? Is it a big intro? And then we clear out for the first verse. So part of that depends on if it's just piano or acoustic at the top of the song, as far as what I'm going to set up. There's times where we don't enter until the second verse. Just having that vision, it's so wide, it's kind of hard to say how I would pick which guitar for that. It's more of, you want this to appeal to a younger country artist, audience, or you want this to be a pop song, well, then I'm definitely going to stay with these guitars. You want it to be, you want it to be outside the box and not sound Nashville, I'll definitely stay away from this stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's more of things that I will not allow myself to go to rather than, I'm not going to do that, And it gives you some space to try some stuff at that point. Well, maybe since I'm not going to do that, I can maybe try this or this or this or this.
That's a really great perspective to think about instead of like what you would do. Well, starting with the sort of the process of elimination.
Yeah.
So if we're going for this, then I know that these things are not going to be the tool, and this is what I have left over. So let's try these things out. Now we can experiment.
It's like if you graduate from college, and the dean of the school leads you to the end of this hallway, opens this door, and it's wide open to the heavens and earth, and he says, you can do anything you want to do. And you're like, can you narrow down the choices? You have to have choices and stuff.
So you mentioned the importance of being able to kind of think a couple parts ahead to make sure that what you're playing is satisfying the foundation of the track, but then you know that these other things are going to fit in. How are you able to build the understanding or the vision to be able to do that?
There are certain things that we do as guitar players that help the listener know that, oh, you've reached the big point of the song. You're at the chorus now. There's these places in a song where either the keyboardist or the guitar player, somebody's going to need to pick up and keep that listener going through the song. Once they've heard the intro and the sig lick, the signature lick or whatever, and the verse and the chorus, they've basically heard the song. And now we're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So second verse, somebody's going to have to do something to keep them engaged. Hopefully that next chorus, they would have heard the first one where they're either singing along or something with the second chorus. Mm-hmm. We're in trouble again. There's a bridge. We have to put a bridge in to kind of either sum up lyrically what's going on or to take them to a musical spot that they haven't heard yet in the song to keep them interested.
Right.
And then we all do a victory lap with a couple more choruses at the end, Mm-hmm. Telling someone that they've entered the chorus. If you want it, like grandeur, you need some lows and you need some highs and stuff. And a thing that I've done on so many records is a subtle thing of power, where the power guitars are in there to where if you mute them, you'd miss them. But if you unmute them, it's like, okay, I think I can hear them. But it would be kind of empty without them.
Now, when you're doing that,
yeah,
how do you voice the chords and how do you adjust your tone? What do you think about to be able to create a part
right.
and a sound
right.
that has impact but doesn't step on everything?
Right. Well, one, I'm choosing either between a vintage power, guitar sound or more of a modern. Mm-hmm. And when I think of vintage, I have a 1966 50-watt Marshall Plexi head. And a Les Paul into that, a well-tuned Les Paul, doubled up, it's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. It gets you in that pocket. And the 412 cabinet, Marshall 412, it leaves room for the vocal. It doesn't totally walk on the vocal mid-range wise. Power, like a modern power, is even more so, scooped out, with a modern head, mm-hmm. whether it's a boogie head. I've got a custom audio head, and it adds even, it's more of a caricature of what a Marshall would do with more scoop, and you can get away with a little bit more in that sound because you're not going to be walking on the vocal.
Now, is there a way that you voice the chords, or that you play the strings, or
there was I got an interesting lesson in that from listening. I was able to listen to some early Kelly Clarkson pop tracks and the way they layered up stuff, and all the parts were doubled. So if this were a pop song where the guitars needed to be very prominent, the power guitars are very prominent, mm-hmm. what they would do is that you would have this low, maybe like a detuned baritone thing that's super just like whole notes, not a lot of movement at all, doubled up, in tune, and just super low and just very basic. Mm-hmm. The next layer up would be an inversion up with more movement, and maybe some passing tones. But still in a lower register, but not like, sub, low, whatever. And then there would be a third pass, double two, where it's yet up another inversion and with lots more movement to it. And when you'd put in these 6 guitars, 3 aside, they were so well orchestrated that it sounded like one fantastic guitar. And it stayed away from the vocal. It's left and right of the vocal, and it had interest there. So that's a little different from just doing a straight power chord thing. Mm-hmm. But with a straight power chord thing, I try not to get too high with it. The more pop a song is, the more high I can get it. The inversions. Mm-hmm. There's just little rules of thumb, and the thing is that there's no like hard rules on voicings and things. Sometimes you can take liberties and do super low stuff or get up in higher inversions. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that depend on the instrumentation in the track?
Yeah.
And kind of what you're hearing and like where you can fit in?
Yeah.
Or whether it's a male or female vocal and the register that the melody is in or the key that the song is in?
Yeah. Yeah, I recently had a thing where I was working at my studio where the key is kind of having a baritone on it. You put the baritone up in a weird register. The electric guitar it was just some keys aren't that great. And I'll detune guitars. I'll keep some stuff in a flattened key. I'll keep some guitars whole step down, especially when you're moving so fast on a session. You don't want to take a guitar like a Strat with a tailpiece on it and try to detune it a half step. You're going to be a while trying to get it to settle in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What sort of equipment is good as a starting point? Let's say that you're getting ready to get on your first session gig and you want to prepare yourself, mm-hmm. and you know what you know now. What are some of the things to look out for as far as a base level sort of equipment set up to have the options that you need? To be able to kind of cover the range, and then some of those things that people might not think about as far as accessories and just maintenance of your instruments.
Yeah, well, the maintenance is a big deal. If it needs to be able to play up in tune, up and down the neck, and you need to be able to play it in tune because you can inadvertently through poor technique, knock it out. You can tune it up, and it's great, and bang, you've seen that,
right?
It's funny because one thing that has not changed over the years, especially for here in Nashville, is those basic food groups of a Les Paul or a Gibson-style guitar. And I say Gibson-style because a lot of guys are using PRSs, which are really well made, and they play in tune, and younger guys gravitate towards them, and it's a really good choice for a humbucker style guitar. Mm-hmm. But the major food groups being a Les Paul, a Tele, a Strat, a semi hollow body guitar, a hollow body guitar, and then some other little more oddball type guitars. Whether it's a vintage guitar with some gold foil, a cheap guitar with gold foil pickups, but that will play in tune. I'll bring those major food groups, and then a couple of 2-3 more that are already detuned and ready, to go in different keys. Mm-hmm. And that happens when you're working with female artists. There's a lot of D flats and G flats and E flats and things like that. So mm-hmm. having a guitar that's ready to go in those keys will keep things moving along, because a keyboardist will switch instruments just by hitting a button.
Right.
And we don't have that. Everybody will go to track, and the drummer will go, "You want me to do some percussion?" And they'll go, "Yeah, do a tambourine or shaker." So he grabs it. He's ready. The acoustic player is ready to do his double. The keyboardist is ready to do his pad. And you're going, "Oh, wait, ding, 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 ding." I have several pedal boards, and the one I normally take on my own, it will have one multi-effect thing, a line 6 multi-effect, because it covers those little fringe effect. Hey, do you have an auto wah, or do you have a flanger? Mm-hmm. Things that you would not normally tack down to your pedal board. You can just kind of pull up a pretty good facsimile of it. Mm-hmm. I collect pedals, and I own most of the pedals that those Line 6 things emulate, and they do a really great job. Having a basic pedal board with a volume pedal, tuner, some dirt boxes, some overdrives and things like that, some delays, and then a multi-effects, and that covers just about everything, I find for sessions. I'll either bring a combo amp, whether it's like I have a Lazy J, which is a Tweed Deluxe clone. I have an old Blackface Fender Princeton amp, Princeton Reverb. I have a Brownface Princeton. That's for combo amps if I go that route. That'd be more for a roots rock type thing. Mm-hmm. For most everything I do, it's a matchless head, which is basically a Vox type amp that's with super hefty low end on it, mm-hmm. solid. And that'll get me through just about any session here in town.
Something that surprised me early on when I first started getting into sessions was the small size of many of the cabinets that players brought with them.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting in that, and I remember reading long time ago about how some of the classic rock albums were made on small combo amps, close mic'd for proximity effect for the low end. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I've been in those situations where a band guy will come in with an amp, a stack or whatever into the studio, and like a room this size, it'd be great to have a 412 in here. Mm-hmm. But most of the time it's in a small ISO room, and a 412 in a small ISO room can sound tiny. If I need a focused, solid sound, a single 12 cabinet does the deal. And mm-hmm. I've got one that's ported. It's a teal design cabinet. If I'm saying that right, no one knows how to say it. It's THIELE, a teal design, and it's a formula of how to build the cabinet in the size of port, where it gives you a little bit more focused low end coming out. The matchless through that makes most engineers really happy.
How do you deal with electricity, grounding, buzzing? That's something that comes up a lot, and is another one of those things that I see as a big differentiator between professional player and an amateur player, or someone that's just kind of getting into it.
The main thing that I reach for, it's called a Barry O'Neill. He's at XTS, Exact Tone Solutions. Mm-hmm. Barry O'Neill, he's the tech guy, who puts most everybody's pedal boards together. He's great as far as going through and getting some of those demons out, mm-hmm. Some of those ground problems. So if you're in town, Barry O'Neill is the guy. But for everything else, it's that experimentation of trying to bulletproof your rig to where no matter where you plug in, you're not gonna have anything that knocks you out of being recorded. Now, I'll be honest, there's times where I heavily use a volume pedal. That's a gate. And that's more for the guitar pickups, picking mm-hmm. up RF, So I will kind of gate myself and what buzz? And you're playing as you bring the volume pedal up. Mm-hmm. So the volume pedal can be a tool as far as getting around some of those things. Ground lifts, I also have an isolation transformer thing. It's passive that you can plug in, especially if you're using 2 amps. Now you're really asking for it. Mm-hmm. And so an isolation transformer can definitely help out. And they're like $40 or something like it, $50 probably. Mm-hmm. But knowing where all those ground lifts are, making sure your cables are all really good quality cables, and making sure that there's no speaker lines where you're using instrument lines and stuff that can introduce hum and stuff.
So let's move a little bit outside of your chair mm-hmm. and talk a little bit about coming back to the having big ears and listening. Mm-hmm. What do you listen for in all the other chairs or all the other instruments that are happening in the track? Let's break it down. Let's start with like drums.
Right.
You hear a track or you start that first take and the drummer starts in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. What is what the drummer plays going to inform some of your decisions as it comes to your rhythm or maybe the moments where you step out or don't step out?
Right.
Based on that.
Right.
What do you listen for in let's just say the rhythm section, drums and bass?
It's so funny, but when we're getting sounds and the drummer is just playing by himself and I start playing to a drummer, we both instantly feel like what we're doing if we were playing those without the other guy, it would sound kind of dumb or whatever. But when you get that energy and the synergy of going with the drums, that interaction, suddenly, the producer will hit the top back and go, "Hey, what are y'all playing? That's pretty cool." And we call it getting sounds, Yeah, and as a guitar player, I need to know what the pattern is and where the drums enter. Their dynamic, are they in full bore? Or are they just entering in slightly? That determines so much from for what I do.
Right. Now, when you're thinking about the rhythm or the pattern, how much do you syncopate versus not syncopate?
Yeah.
What informs your decision about what to kind of follow with them and what to fill in a gap?
Well, we all have our own natural, our own thing as far as whether we come in on upbeats. Some guys are downbeat guys. Some guys will play a solo starting on the downbeat, and the last note of the solo will be a downbeat of the next section. And typically I don't do that. I start on an upbeat, or I'll start past where the solo starts on an upbeat and then end on an upbeat. And I don't even do it consciously. We each have our own individual phrasing. And the main place where that comes in is if I'm working with another guitar player, I kind of pride myself as far as being a good dance partner with another guitar player. And if they're more of a upbeat guy, I'll be it on the downbeat. You're playing low, I'll play high. You're busy, I'll lay back. I'm busy, you'll be laying back. It's just you're trying to get these complementary dance moves down with another player. There's times where my natural phrasing for a line, it's like, man, this is something that I would play all day long. Oh, it doesn't work for this particular song, and you have to abandon that and just bend to the song.
With drums and bass, how do you make the determination about what to lock into with them and what to?
Well, for attitude wise, if I feel like the guitar needs to be an anchor and really help anchor the song, it's more of a downbeat thing. If it needs to be more of an energy thing, it's more of an upbeat phrasing.
So keyboards and guitars, both very sonically, have a big sonic range to them.
Yeah.
Let's say that you're on a tracking session with a player. What sort of conversations do you guys have, or what are you listening to and adjusting, based on what they might be playing or what you might want to play and what you're hearing them play?
Yeah.
How does that interaction go?
Well, most of it comes down to where you do an embellishment on a rhythm part, where you might do a fill around the vocal. And you're also trying to vibe that out with the keyboardist, who might do a lick or something there. And maybe you'll do a run through that kind of, we don't really talk about it. We talk about it through playing, know. You'll do a run through and I'll kind of vibe out, okay, he's kind of digging the second verse, Well, maybe I'll do something on the first verse. In pop and rock and alternative music, there can be space and everybody's cool with it. In country, somebody better fill that space. I'm not real comfortable with that. I like being able to, especially if it's a great singer. I just worked on a thing where it was a great singer, great song, and I didn't want to hear me or anybody else stepping out. The song was so cool. The singer was so good. His tone was badass. It's just like, let's just vibe on this guy, and we'll just be supportive of that. But I will listen to where the keyboardist is doing fills or where they may establish a part that has on the, say, bar 4, it has a certain thing. I'll either stay out of the way of it or maybe double it, and it depends on the keyboardist. Some keyboardists come in and they're very inside with their voicings. And some are like this,
Right.
So you're in trying to be that dance partner. You're listening to whether they're wide or if they're inside. And if they're inside, where are they range-wise? And you just work around that,
I love the analogy of the dance, thing going where everybody just kind of has to work together to be able to fill out each step.
Yeah. And it's the only place you'll ever catch us dancing.
Right.
You're probably a great dancer.
No, not. Yeah, I wish. Something that's really interesting to me is the ability that many players have to navigate the conversations of like, instinctually, or you feel instinctually like what would be right and what would support this arrangement in the right way. But the artist may not totally get it yet.
Right.
The producer may have a vision and they might understand, but maybe they're trying to figure out how to explain it to the artist. They need to hear it. And there's some musicians have the ability to just really dance around that whole relationship between everyone in the room to be able to know when to say, hey, could we try this thing? Or know when to say, this idea, even though I like it, probably isn't the thing, and I'm still going to be happy with it because this is, my name isn't going on the front of this, record.
Yeah.
How have you learned to navigate those?
I could walk into a room and not say anything to the artist. That void, they go, he hates me, or he doesn't respect me, or he doesn't respect the song. Sometimes you have to be very vocal, or vocal enough just to let them know that you're happy to be there. So glad I'm getting to work on this song with you. Because a lot of times artists are talking a different language. So it's like, assume that this artist is speaking a foreign language. The producer can kind of speak their language and can also speak musician.
Right.
So there's that flow of, the producer being the middle guy on all that, who's trying to make the artist feel comfortable and happy with these guys and happy with the way this song is going and the direction, but still being able to instruct the musicians. So there's so many times where an artist, if it's the first time for them to work with this particular group of people, and especially if they're new to the game, number one, they're going to be thinking, I bet these guys miss what I'm about. They're going to miss the mark on what I'm trying to do with this song. So unfortunately, it's the producer, how you produce. It's the producer's job to get the right players, to do the right casting call, that both musically and personality wise, that would be a good fit for this artist. We have kind of a Chamber of Commerce attitude in that you're going to walk out loving what we just did, and you're going to tell your friends, hey, come to Nashville and work with these guys. They're the best. I can't believe what they did. It was magic, Mm-hmm. So part of that is just how you come across with what you say and how you act. And then part of it, the big part is how you play, Reading the room, reading that artist is so crucial, because we can come in, especially when you do a ton of sessions, you can come in too comfortable and throw some attitude, and you're just comfortable, and you walk out, man, that was fun, and they're like, man, what was with him today? And you're not even aware that you did something. It's a balancing act as far as being able to read what the producer wants, what the artist wants, and where it's headed, on the floor with all the other musicians. If you come up with an idea for something, you can lay it out two different ways. You can just, in between takes, just start playing it.
Yeah, which is a great trick.
And somebody has to stop like, hey, that's pretty cool. Let's try that as an intro, Or you could say, hey, I've got an idea, see if this works for you for an intro. Can we just run this section? And you just play it and stuff. And early on in my career, I remember that how those ideas that I would come up with for maybe an intro thing, it'd be like, this is probably the greatest thing I've ever heard. And this would be so cool on this record. And then when they turn it down, it's just like, it bums you out. But after years of doing it, you realize what your place is. You realize that you're just you're just a piece of this, and that the song is going to live and not die because they didn't use your idea. It's like, well, I'll just kind of use that on somebody else's song later. You just kind of have to take your ego out of it And if they go with somebody else's idea, it's like, cool, where are we eating lunch?
Are there certain practices that you do when you come into a session as far as like how you greet people and, carry yourself? What sort of things have you done as your career evolves to be able to stay in that moment and be grateful for each opportunity that comes up?
Well, early on, I would try to muster up my courage to feel good enough to be able to walk into the room and feel like you had something to offer. And then once I moved into the middle part of my career where I felt like, hey, I got this, then you just walk in going, hey, I got this. And now I'm on this whatever slope of my career, and having done it so much, I'm doing something that I've never done before in my career. So I'm glad you asked this question, is that those last few minutes of driving to the session, and I'll just kind of center and focus. All right, I've got this expectation because I'm working with this person. What am I going to offer? Not there for me, but there for the artist, for the producer, and the song. There's so many times where I have to just kind of verbally go through that in my brain rather than just walk in and whatever. I will go through a little bit of a centering and focus before I walk into a session now.
What a great practice to have.
Yeah.
I think everyone should do that before they walk into whatever job that they have.
I should have done it years ago.
Just to get themselves ready for the day. Yeah. Well, hopefully now that we're sharing this with folks, we'll be able to pass it on and have people start, early in their career.
It puts you in the right frame of mind because, especially here in town, I keep harping on it that we move so fast, tragically fast, that I have to get on the right track even before I walk in the room. I have to get on the right path even before I go in.
When you have a skill and you have a job that's so fun, and just it never really rarely feels like work, it becomes really easy to just kind of get a little, carefree with it and just, it's another fun day, just hanging out and, and doing that.
So here's another thing I had to do, and this is where the iPhone came in handy. There's a particular acoustic player here in town. I'll go ahead and tell you his name. His name's Scott Dente. And I haven't worked with him in a while, but when he and I would get on sessions together, we would get into this comedy routine that was enjoyed by an audience of two people, me and him. And we would just like riff on each other. And finally, it would bum the producer out to the point where it's like, wow, I had no idea we were getting that out of hand. When I would work with Scott, I would put in my calendar reminders throughout the day, like little alarms. I would write maintain. Because I knew if I was with Scott, we would be having too much fun at the artist and producer's expense and maybe derail the session. And I would look at it, would pop up on my phone, maintain. I'm like, oh yeah. Okay.
Wow, man, that's great advice to just have those little reminders, that'll pull you back into the moment because you never know when you can kind of fall out of it, throughout the day. Yeah. And so to just not necessarily just rely on yourself to hold yourself accountable in those moments, but have something that just pops up and tells you. That's great. One other thing that we wanted to discuss was remote recording. So a big change that has happened in the past number of years has been musicians being able to work from home and do really high quality work from home. Not just like flying in some like demo tracks, but playing stuff that ends up on really big records. Yeah. And there's been a number of different reasons, for that. Some of it is an efficiency thing. Some of it is just timeline and needing to get something, knocked out. The technology is there, and players have become. Some players have built themselves some really great rooms to be able to get sounds that are just as good as any major studio they'd walk into. Yeah. When did that process start for you?
Gosh, it had evolved over the years because I would be out on the road and I would want to be able to record stuff remotely. So I would put together kind of a remote recording rig, and then I would take that home and use it at the house. And then as I started kind of weaning myself off the road, I started, really trying to putting together an amp room, because even though we have amp simulators and stuff, I still like the sexiness of moving air.
Yep, me too.
And I use a Kemper. I use Guitar Rig from Native Instruments. I do programming preset programming for native instruments. And a lot of times they send it to me because I'm A/Bing it against vintage amplifiers. I can listen to their software, and I did a thing yesterday where I did my parts, did temporary parts, all with Guitar Rig just for speed.
Mm-hmm.
I reamped some of it into old amps using a reamp box,
Mm-hmm.
and then kept Guitar Rig for some of the other stuff because it just sounded good. When I'm doing that, I'm finding, and you may find this, when you're doing remote recording, especially with Zoom or FaceTime, you're the player, you're the engineer, and you're the studio owner, you're the kind of the host for the whole thing, producer.
Mm-hmm.
Used to, you'd have the producer there who could talk to the artist, you'd have the engineer there who could be doing all the heavy lifting, and you're just waiting to play.
Right.
But when you're doing remote recording, and especially with a Zoom call or whatever, it's several plates to spin, and it's pretty taxing.
Right.
That's
a great point. A lot of times when I think about sort of exploring the remote recording thing, it gets into kind of like setup and gear and, process and all that. What you bring up is how you have to now have these couple different roles that you play.
Yes.
And it's a different approach than just walking in and, and playing your instrument. So was that a transitional process for you at all to kind of figure out how to manage those things that you were used to doing?
Yeah, it was nice in that it didn't start off with having to do Zoom stuff along with playing. And I don't do a ton of those, but I do enough to where I have to have that gear set up and ready.
Right.
But yeah, the great thing about when you're working on your own, a part that maybe would take you an hour, if you need to take 2, 3 hours, 4 hours, including the setup for it and stuff, you do it. That's one of the great things about remote recording is that you are working at your own pace. And one of the worst things about remote recording is that you are working at your own pace, because I will take so much longer than if I were in the studio working for a producer. Because when you're working for someone that's right there, you're performing. And if you're by yourself, you're not performing. Now you have more time to get inside your head in a good way and a bad way.
Mm-hmm. Have you found any good ways to manage the pro and con of that?
There can be quite a bit of setup time, depending on how people send you stuff. If they send you just stems that you put into a session, or they send you a session where there's no stems in it or anything, and you're having to subgroups things and stuff. There can be a lot of setup work. You're charting, you're putting in markers, different things like that can rob you of your creative juices, your time and everything. I try to do my setup time separate from when I play on a track. So like if I'm going to work on a track in the morning, the night before, if they've sent me the files, I'll go ahead and try to do the chart, get the session set up, ready to go, where in the morning I come in and can start doing the creative side of it. One thing that I've found is that when I hear a song for the first time, that's usually when I'll get a really good idea as far as the hook lick, the hook line, or an approach or a part in one of the verses. When that happens and I'm just trying to set the session up, I grab my phone, put it on voice memo, and I'll play the track and I'll sing the idea and I'll keep going. I'll just keep working then. And the next morning I'll listen to it and go, either that made the test of time or that was a terrible idea, So I try to separate the busy work from the creative side of things.
How do you have your equipment set up, and how do you jump between sounds, and how does your workflow work within your environment?
I can say that my setup is unique in that from my doing programming with Native Instruments Guitar Rig, they have different amps, different cabinets, and you can switch cabinets out and stuff, with the software. And I thought, I own all these amps. I want to do that for real. Back in 2008, when I bought the house that I'm living in, I wanted to set up a studio, and I wanted to have a room with all those cabinets. So, because the character of the sound is really, I found it comes more from the cabinets a lot of the times than the amp head itself. And we proved it at my studio when we ran like 6 different amp heads into one cabinet, not at the same time, of course, but recorded playing into those 6 different amp heads that were generations apart as far as amp design, and some from the UK, some from the States, all into the same cabinet. The cabinet kind of samed everything out. It's like a comb filter. It's like the final EQ, and it made a British vintage amp sound like a American modern amp, kind of, So it's that combination of both amp, electronics, amp head, and the cabinet. So I wanted to have those different flavors of cabinets, and I ended up building a microphone that is on a pan tilt head that can move around, and it can circle the room, and I've got all my cabinets set up in a big circle. And so in between overdubs, I go, I want to use the Marshall head through the Marshall cabinet now. And I've got a little joystick controller that I recall the presets, and it moves it over to the other amp head. So what I found is that by doing that, my parts kind of find their own space around each other. A Strat will sound more like a Strat to, say, an old Vox AC30. The Les Paul will sound more like a Les Paul through the Marshall, and a Gretsch through the Matchless will sound more, it gives it's a way of pairing up the guitar and the amps and the cabinets to match the part and to fit in the track. I got to work with this engineer that engineered several AC/DC records. And, when you think of AC/DC, you think of kind of that one sound, but every part, he said every part that they played on the guitars, all the overdubs and stuff, they each had their own mic placement. The cabinet being a different place in the room. They would set up specifically just for that part. So that's the kind of mentality that I'm going for with my setup.
I can't wait to see what that setup
cool.
looks like.
It's fun.
And so for someone that doesn't have a room like that and doesn't have all those amps and everything, I imagine that you could use Guitar Rig, you could use a Kemper, something like that.
Or the aux box. From Universal Audio, the aux box, it'll allow you to put your amp head into it and then switch out cabinet simulations. The IRs that have it.
Oh, nice!
And those are really cool. Those are really cool. And the more harmonic content, like especially for distorted parts and stuff, where it's more like white noise. That's when those IRs and cabinet choices really make a huge difference. How it sits in a track. So I've even done this where I will reamp a part after I've recorded it through a different amp just to find a better spot sonically in the track. So one thing I remember working in the late 80s, there's a great engineer here in town, Jeff Balding. Working with him on a track, he would pull my guitar on an overdub. He would pull my guitar down volume-wise where I could barely hear it. And he would have a George Massenburg EQ, and he'd be finding the places mid-range-wise that would make it speak even when it was at low level in the track. So that way when he'd bring it up to where he wanted to hear it, it was speaking in the right spots. I've had tracks where I've layered up several guitar passes, and then I realize the first pass that I did has disappeared. And so I will I take a DI with every track that I record at my place. I will send that DI out to a reamp box, put it maybe through the same amp, and move the microphone with the joystick, or maybe switch it over to a totally different amp. I'll hook up a different pedal at reamp box to a different distortion pedal or whatever into this new amp, and I'll sip coffee and find the right mic placement, hit record, and finish my cup of coffee while it prints.
And it covers a principle that I use a lot in producing engineering is to move something before you go to grab something to process it. Move the instrument around, change the instrument, change the microphone, keep the sound and signal as pure as it can be coming in to be able to to get it to fit into the track in the right way.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you pay attention to when you're trying to shape that sound?
When I first started doing recording on my own, I became slightly paralyzed with the fact that, all right, when I hit record, this is the sound. So I need to make sure that the amp is right, the guitar is right. If there's effects on it, what the effects are, that the blend of the delay isn't too much or too little, to the point to where it would kind of interfere with the creative process, until I started taking a direct signal off the guitar. And that's my backup plan now, that I can make really good, intelligent guesses that 90% of the time they work. But like yesterday, I reprinted something using the DI through a reamp box out to the amp again. I just did a thing for HBO. It was a theme for one of their made for HBO, series, and it was played on piano, and they wanted it played on guitar, electric guitar. And I played it, sent it out to the producer out in LA, and then the next morning I woke up, put it up just to listen to hear what I had done. I was like, I'm not totally happy with the sound, and I don't want to replay that. I had the DI, sent that to a reamp box, put it through a different amp, printed it, sent it to him. I said, hey, try this sound. And he goes, I like that much better. One, it allows me to see where I am pocket-wise, because if you're doing heavy chugs, you look at the sound wave of the amp, and it's just like, you can't tell anything. With the DI, you can see exactly where you were. You can make better crossfades that way. And then in a pinch, if you need to reamp it, you can.
Any way that you can help yourself, free yourself up to be more creative. And not have those distractions or the second guessing, which is just sort of the impassable curse of being, creative, is always kind of second guessing the decision and like, is this good enough? Is this right? And you can, as you said, become paralyzed by that. So, and
that's another good argument for having an engineer there, is that I know I have some guys that don't feel comfortable using Pro Tools or Logic or whatever, and they hire a guy to come in. So that engineer helps them get sounds and can also go, hey man, that was good. Or, why don't you hit it again? It's that second person to bounce it off of, where you're not inside your own head and trying to second guess stuff. But they charge money. It's the only problem I've had with engineers.
You gotta build a robot like you have for your microphone, and then
that ain't gonna happen.
How does the process for you creatively, outside of the technical side of things, change when you're thinking about building your parts and all of that, from being in a studio with a group of players and a producer and engineer to being on your own?
I'll listen to it a couple of three times just to get to know the song better, even before I chart it, because I'll be thinking about charting rather than listening to the song. It plays back the same way every time. The keyboards do a fill in this bar every time the same way. When you're on a session, each time you do a take with other live players, every time it's different. When you're on your own, you get a true sense of where everything is sitting, and I can map out, that'd be a good spot to do nothing, or that would be a good spot to shine, or that'd be a good spot for a particular sound. Now, what would that be? And you pull up some references and start going through. You can't really do that on a session. Just as we were talking about reading the room, you have to read the song and read the intent of the artist and the producer. I was just sent a track where I could tell I was just sent drums, bass, and a vocal, and then a demo of the band playing the song. And it felt more like a band type thing. So at that point, I'm not going to do a lot of parts, but the parts need to dance well together. They need to complement each other. And they're going to be from top to bottom pretty much. It was more of a rock type song. It's like they've been on tour together and been listening to each other's parts for a while and have mapped stuff out without talking. So that's what I'm trying to recreate on my own in the studio. There's other times to where it'll be more of a pop type song, and there's no guitar hardly anywhere except the choruses. There will be a song where that the artist and the producer are a little more old school, and you'll do all the layering up of this and this and this and this, or it's a younger track guy type person that wants a library of songs that are in the right key, in the right genre, in the right tempo that he can pull and draw from. It's kind of reading the situation of who you're working with and what their expectations are.
There's a lot that you can learn through especially with your level of experience, to be able to just listen to something and have a pretty good instinct for what they're going for.
Yeah.
But are there scenarios where you say, I probably need to send this guy a message or give him a call just to make sure that what I'm hearing is what they're hearing?
Some guys are very particular, and then some are just happy to be there and just happy to get stuff back from you.
Right.
And then there's all points in between. So
and you start to learn that about people as you work with them, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something that you pay attention to.
Yes. Otherwise, you can be asking questions when it's too late. Depending on the track that I'm doing, how in-depth it gets, I will make notes in the comment fields of the track, this guitar, this amp, these effects. If I've moved the mic into an unusual spot on the cabinet, I have a TV screen that I can see where my mic is on the cabinet. I'll take my iPhone and take a picture of it. Just stuff like that. I will document where I am on things, that if I have to go in and replay a section or a bar or whatever, I can recreate the sound.
So when it comes to finishing up your files and delivering them to the client, do you have any practices or things that you've learned along the way about how to make that process efficient?
I really try to do stuff where they don't have to edit it after the fact, where they get it, it's camera ready. It's ready to pop into the song, find the right level, move on. And if the ring out has some buzz on it, I will get past it, put a little buzz, get isotope, RX, and learn that buzz and just get the last chord of the song ring out and just do the last instead of wiping the whole track, because it's just that last chord that needs cleaning up or whatever. But I'll make sure everything's pocketed, that there's no pops, and consolidate, send it out. Other producers like to have all the punches and everything without it being consolidated. With some guys that are more of track guys, I'll send them my DI. Some guitar parts I may print with some verb on it, Valhalla or whatever, if it's part of the vibe. But then I'll also strip that off and print it without it and send dry files. So I'll try to give some flexibility if I feel like that person wants it.
And it's a good example of a small thing that doesn't take a lot of time.
Right.
That would make a huge difference in someone's perception of hiring you again.
Right.
Because they know, like, this was no issue. I just pull it up and, it's ready to go.
I just value their time, because why would they have to sit around and edit guitar parts?
And understanding a little bit of that, compression, EQ, the little bit of the engineering side of things is a really great way to be able to up your game as a remote recording instrumentalist.
Yeah, I mean, think about if you're a session player that's working a lot, like you can do a 10 a.m. at Omni, a 2 p.m. at Blackbird, and then a 3 p.m. a 6 p.m. wherever. You're doing 3 sessions with 3 different engineers, 3 different settings with the same gear. So there's that constant. There's you and the gear are the constant. But you're seeing how it reacts with different players in different tracks with different engineers. You're seeing their techniques, and that's one day. You do that, 5 days a week for several years, for many years, and you start to realize how, different engineers work and what does work in a track and what makes it easier on a producer, what makes it better for an artist, what makes it better for a song. You start picking up on all these things from all these different scenarios.
Now, how we started this, as you mentioned, you only gain those things if you have big ears, if you keep yourself open to it.
Yes.
Because you can get these experiences and then not take everything away from it. You can be just focused on the one thing that that you're there to do, not paying attention to the things around it,
right?
And then not be able to walk away from that with all of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And hearing your story today, I've learned that there are so many things that you have because of your big ears and listening, that you've been able to have a career that is spanned decades at a very high level, and you've been able to move with the changes within the industry as things change within technology, to be able to keep working, just as much and be able to expand the way that you work and have a really unique system for being able to do it.
Yeah.
And you did all of that because you listened and learned from that. So I love that we started from that perspective of listening, and really everything that you've shared has showcased that. The steps that we take throughout our career, figuring things out and getting to the place we want to be, can really come from just paying attention. And thanks for doing this, man.
Oh, man.
It was really great to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.